Welcome to Direct Talk interviews with leaders, visionaries, and pioneers who are shaping Asia and the rest of the world. Today we speak to Mao Danqing, a Chinese professor of comparative culture studies at the Kobe International University. He is also a writer, and his magazine articles as well as his books introducing Japanese culture have been big hits with Chinese readers. Mao told us that China's younger generation is very interested in Japanese culture and shared his thoughts on how Japan-China relations can be improved. He stressed the importance of trying to understand cultures other than one's own in an increasingly globalized world.
Culture is like the air we breathe. It's essential to our lives, and we're around it every day. We cannot live without air. Likewise, without culture, we would die.
Mao Danqing firmly believes that culture is fundamental for humans. He was the main writer for It Is Japan, a Chinese magazine about Japanese culture, first published in 2011. In 2016, he launched and began writing for a different cultural magazine titled In Japan. When the first magazine, It Is Japan, came out, relations between Japan and China were strained due to politics.
After political relations took a turn for the worse, many Chinese people said they hated Japan. And I thought it was all the more reason for them to try to understand Japan. So we published the magazine at the worst point in Japan-China relations, which may have come as a surprise for some.
Mao and his colleagues chose not to refer to political or social problems. Instead, they focused on topics related to daily life, such as food, housing, and fashion. The magazine sold far more than expected, and at times, 100,000 copies of an issue would fly off the shelves.
The response we received when the magazine came out was overwhelming. We never imagined so many people would welcome the publication. It made us realize that there were many Chinese people out there who were interested in the Japanese lifestyle and wanted to know more about it. They felt that understanding Japanese culture would enrich their own lives, that it would help them increase their knowledge and have a deeper insight. Those people were our readers. The magazine continued because there were many young Chinese who wanted to know Japan better.
It Is Japan became a big success, but 5 years later, Mao decided to leave. All the writers other than himself lived in China. Mao felt that because they did not have a thorough understanding of Japan, what they were writing was different from what he was experiencing in Japan. Convinced that writers for a Japanese culture magazine should be in the country, living and breathing the culture, he founded In Japan. He asked students from China to join him as staff members.
All the editors and writers for In Japan came to the country as students, and some are still in school. And because they are physically here, they can meet with cultural figures and intellectuals and converse with them face to face. I'll give you one example. The novel Hibana, or Spark. Naoki Matayoshi, the author, is famous in Japan, while in China he's not well known. Only a handful of people are familiar with the name.
In 2015, Japanese comedian Naoki Matayoshi won a major literary award and became the talk of the town. Mao translated it into Chinese, and in 2017, he took the author to Shanghai so that Matayoshi could get to know China.
After he returned to Japan, he shared his thoughts and impressions publicly on television shows and with newspapers. So, Japanese people had the opportunity to find out a little bit more about China. They were exposed to its culture and what daily life is like there through this one person, Matayoshi. It's a kind of ripple effect, if you will. His visit could not have happened with the older magazine. I think this highlights the importance of having writers and editorial staff in Japan.
Mao says he was struck by something Matayoshi said to him.
He said, China and Japan, our countries are actually quite similar. We should stop dwelling on our differences and focus on our similarities. He also said, our commonalities are a ray of hope. A wonderful way to phrase it.
Mao was born in Beijing in 1987 when he was 25 years old. He came to Japan as a student, wanting to learn more about the world outside of China. After studying at a university for 2 years, he spent a decade working for a Japanese trading company. He would save up money and travel around the world to experience regional cultures and talk to locals. Writing about these experiences brought about his big break as an author. Mao now writes while teaching comparative culture and tourism courses at a university. He speaks fluent Japanese in his class.
As I have said many times in this class, you need to look at Japan from an outsider's point of view. You should compare your culture to that of others and think about what your role might be in this increasingly globalized world.
At this university, Japanese and foreign students, mainly from other Asian countries, study together. The topic for this class was the commonalities between Japanese and Chinese cultures. Rather than lecturing, Mao asks his students to think it over and share their thoughts with their peers.
How about clothing?
I think that the Japanese kimono looks similar to Chinese clothing during the Han Dynasty.
One student thought that the kimono has commonalities with Chinese clothing from about 2,000 years ago. To see if this is the case, he has students from Japan and China draw each of them on the board.
This does look like the Japanese kimono.
I see. One major concept is to examine Japanese culture from the outside in. That's why I wanted to do this class with all of you today, from Japan and elsewhere.
Until I came here, my image of Japan was very limited and skewed. For example, that young people liked anime. It was very one-dimensional. But in Professor Mao's class, I've learned about Japan's economic development and cultural exchanges between China and Japan. The professor shares many of his personal experiences and the work he has done in Japan. Through hearing these, I now understand how our countries differ in terms of culture and how they developed economically.
We come from different backgrounds and different cultures. But in this class, we can share them, talk about them, and have fun, so it's nice.
Mao feels that there is a marked difference between his Japanese students and students from abroad in their enthusiasm for learning about their classmates' native countries.
Compared to my students coming from overseas, I don't think my Japanese students have a very strong desire to learn about the outside world, and I think that is very unfortunate. Japan has matured as a society, is to have more people visit China and see what it's like for themselves, especially the younger generation. I want young Japanese people to experience China firsthand and familiarize themselves with life in a different country, and hopefully that will help change the image they have of China.
Mao periodically takes Japanese students with him to China for them to talk to locals and experience the culture there. He hopes that young people everywhere can have opportunities to widen their horizons.
In order to know yourself, you have to know the world. So I always tell my students, think about how to make yourself interested in the world. I think this is crucial. The relationship between countries boils down to relationships between people. Caring about another person is the most beautiful thing. Countries are essentially an aggregate of individuals. They are a mere formality. I believe that exchanges between people on a non-governmental level is very important. So I hope that students from both China and Japan will participate in making the In Japan magazine. Through writing, drawing, and creating something together, you make friends. These friendships are what will shape the relations between our two countries in the future. I think that Japan-China relations will continue to improve. There is more and more personal contact between ordinary people, and more friendships formed, which will translate to better bilateral relations. That is what I think and what I wish for. You know, relations between our two countries have developed over several thousand years. I'm not sure any other two countries in the world have such a rich history together. So I sincerely hope that we will continue to be on friendly terms. And what I think is a shame is that both in China and in Japan, people are quick to bring up politics. They talk about the effects of political relations souring and so on. But politics is just one part of culture, which is broader and encompasses much more. When we consider relations between China and Japan, we need to look at the overall picture, which is culture. Culture is everywhere, as much a part of our lives as the air we breathe. This is my favorite proverb. Water that flows will never go bad. I interpret it to mean that we should adapt to change. We shouldn't confine ourselves to one place or one viewpoint, and we need to look at the world around us. Water that flows will never go bad.